So we're going to learn a little bit about color here. Let me go from the beginning of the presentation. So everyone can profit from knowing some basic color principles. And in this unit of study, I'm going to show you how this element of design can be used effectively to enhance your work. We're going to cover color theory, a little bit of color in art history, color used in design, and then we'll get into actually working with a medium, which for this unit will be oil pastels. So color has a basic instinctive and visual appeal. And although there's been great works of art that have been created in strictly black and white, few artists have totally ignored the added visual interest that color lends itself to. So here we have Matisse, Jasper Johns, Gauguin. As you can see, they all used vibrant color in these pieces. The uninhibited use of color has been a primary characteristic of the 20th century. This is André Derain, and he was interested in arbitrary color, that is, using color pretty much from his own imagination and not from reality, making pretty dynamic work. Some artists use color in an emotional way. Pablo Picasso had a whole window of time called his Blue Period, where he did a lot of paintings of people who were either ill or struck down by poverty. He lived in a pretty rough neighborhood in Paris, and he saw a lot of it, and it became the whole section of his work, and he used color to heighten that sense, that emotion of difficulty. Some artists use color in a completely intuitive way. This is Jackson Pollock, action paintings, where he dripped large swatches of color all over the canvas, and he did this very quickly and from his gut, so an intuitive way to use color. And then there's the opposite. There are there are artists who have used their entire career focusing on the very specifics of color. And Joseph Albert studied color and its relationships. So when you put colors next to each other or on top of each other or in different proportions, what happens? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So here are the basics. You probably know a lot of these. The basic color wheel. The primary colors cannot be created by mixing with any others. Those are red, yellow, and blue. The secondary colors are produced by mixing the primaries. Red and yellow makes orange, yellow and blue makes green, red and blue make purple. Intermediate are mixing primaries and secondaries. So for example, on this slide, yellow-green is an intermediate. And then the neutrals of white, black, gray, and brown. So let's clarify a little bit about terminology so that we are on the same page when we talk about color as a class and in critiques. Hue and color are often used as synonyms, but there's actually a distinction between the two terms. Hue simply refers to the name of a color, blue, yellow, green, red. But colors are the variations of hues. So there are relatively few hues, but there can be an almost limited number of colors. So here we see sort of pink, rose, scarlet, maroon, and crimson. And these are all, of course, colors from the hue of red. I hope that clarifies hue and color. Then there's value, and that refers to the lightness and darkness of a color. The value of color can change by adding white or adding black. So here we see a variety of blues and a variety of purples and of oranges. There are tints and shades. Adding white lightens a color and produces a tint, as you see here in this painting on the left. And of course, a shade is when you add black to darken the color. But colors themselves have value inherent in them. So yellow, of course, is our lightest valued color, and purple is the darkest. And this is important to keep in mind as you create a composition in color, because the values of colors can create contrast, which can create very dynamic work. So as you see here, the use of a purple background behind that sunflower is making that yellow even more vibrant and dynamic. Then there's washes and tints, and this is referred to when you're working with paint and pigments. And the value of a color can be altered by adding a thinning medium. So the more transparent a color, the lighter it becomes against a white canvas. So here you're looking at a watercolor, and those are very soft, light-valued colors because there's clearly been a lot of water added. So this is kind of fun. This is what Joseph Albers did a lot of work on. This is how colors affect each other. Value can be affected by the surrounding colors, and this must be considered when you're making color decisions. When you're putting colors next to each other, they do affect one another. So this is the same purple on both the left and the right. The middle square is a purple, and they look very different. The one on the left looks quite pink, and the one on the right looks rather blue. But as you'll see, the color running across the bar instead of just two separate dots in each box, you can see that it is the same color. It's kind of a fascinating aspect of color. Then there's intensity, and that refers to the brightness of a color. So an artist can enhance a work of art by either lowering the intensity or raising the intensity. There are different ways to lower the intensity. You can mix gray with a color, or you can mix the complement, which is called breaking a color. So there on the left you see mixing grays in with that turquoisey blue, and over here we're breaking, and you break the color by adding the complement, the color on the opposite end of the color wheel. That red there, that barn red, is not coming right out of the tube. That's probably had a little green mixed into it to darken it. And you can see that these green hills in the background are quite broken as well. They've definitely got a red watercolor mixed in with them. So breaking colors brings unity, and unity is an important thing in your artwork. It gets a sense of coherence when you bring in, when you create unity. And by breaking all of these colors in these paintings, none of these colors are pure hue. They're all broken colors. There's less intensity, but there's also a lovely sense of unity. So you can also enhance the intensity, and that can be done by placing complementary colors next to each other, and the brightness of the proximity of the two really makes it very dynamic and enhances that sense. So as you see on the left here in this Van Gogh, these are both Van Gogh, the dark purpley blues behind the yellow, purple and yellow are complements, create a wonderful dynamic. And so, as is the case in the pool room here with the red and green. So now we're going to talk about color schemes, and you're actually going to be trying to select a color scheme for your first project. So here we go. There's monochromatic, analogous, complementary, split complementary, and triadic. So here's monochromatic. This uses a single pure hue with a number of tints and shades to provide variety. And there are pros and cons to all of these color schemes. So the pros are that, once again, this feels very unified and harmonious. It is effective for establishing a mood. The cons are that it can be dull because of the lack of variation, and therefore you can lose the interest of the viewer. But monochromatic does have its place. So here we see on the left that Monet's cathedral here is all based on a purple, and over here we are working with tints and shades of student work here in turquoise. All right, then there's the analogous theme, and this uses 2 or 3 colors next to each other on the color wheel. And so you can see that we're over here in the reds and oranges and yellows. The pros of the analogous, it's a great selection if possible combinations make this scheme versatile. And the similarity makes the composition harmonious. It feels well resolved. Once again, there's a sense of unity. Even though there's a dynamic change in value, it's all working within the same color palette, and it makes the painting feel very well resolved. The cons are, let's go back. I clicked wrong. Here we go. The cons are that the use of more than 3 colors can dilute the overall effect of this scheme, so you have to be careful with how far you move across the color wheel. Okay, moving on to complementary color scheme. Using 2 colors opposite on the wheel, placing them adjacent to each other. It's extremely eye-catching. The pros of this are eye-catching, vibrant, produces a great sense of contrast. The cons are that it limiting the number of colors in complementary schemes means that the viewer can easily digest the work and be quickly discarded. I would say that both of these pieces, the artist has done some pretty dynamic work with composition as well, and that these are appealing, and I'm happy to stay with these for a bit. But sometimes if it's too easy to digest, you don't get the viewer staying with it very long. Split complementary. This employs colors adjacent to one another in complementary pairs. So, for example, the blue background is used with the yellow and orange, and not just a pure hue orange, but you know, there's variations in value and so forth. And so over here with Gauguin, you can see that he's primarily using blue, and then he's gone across the color wheel into yellows and oranges. So he went across the wheel and split out. Instead of just going to orange, he drifted out a little bit to either side. Triadic scheme, I don't think we talked about pros and cons. So this scheme has more variety than simply complementary color scheme. May hold the viewer longer. But the cons are that it's tricky. It requires careful balance of color and value, and must be considered, which we can cover later, like how much of these colors and what value should you use to get a really effective design. Okay. Triadic scheme, just what it sounds like, 3, triad, 3 hues equally spaced on the color wheel. So red, yellow, and blue would be the most common example in the Jasper Johns theme there. And then, of course, on the right, you see that we have orange, purple, and green. Extremely stable. These are the pros. Each color perfectly balances with the other 2. The bold nature makes for vibrant color scheme, useful for presentation, for a bold, decisive work. The cons are that the vibrancy can be too garish and detract from the message. Now, I would say that Jasper Johns is very in your face, but the pear piece is done with broken colors. Yes, you can have a triadic scheme using broken colors, and so that's a little more sophisticated and not so much in your face. Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that color has temperature. Warm and cool colors. Colors have a temperature because they're associated with certain objects as well. So red and orange often mean, it can equate with like fire. Yellow is sunlight. Blue makes you think of sky and water. Green, grass, plants, and so forth. Warm colors are vivid in nature. They're bold and energetic. Warm colors are those that tend to advance in space. That means they come forward, and therefore caution needs to be taken so you don't overwhelm your content with eye-catching hues. If an element is in your design that needs to pop out, consider using warm colors to do that. And cool colors, I think actually I want to stay with this. Cool colors are soothing in nature. They give an impression of calm. They rarely overpower the main content or message of a design. And cool colors tend to recede. They drop back. And therefore, if some element of your design needs to be in the background, give it cool tones. And so here we have all 5 schemes a la the pear. And if you look for a second, you may want to try to guess which is which. I'll give you just a minute, and then we'll identify them. So there we have purely complementary. Notice it's not fire engine red and grass green, but a kind of a slightly turquoise green against a pink background. That's complementary. Monochromatic. I would argue to say that in that piece I see only green with white with tints and shadows, so black added. This is the triadic scheme we saw a second ago. Orange, green, and purple. This would be a split complementary. All right, notice that we've we're purple and yellow, but we've sort of drifted into different tones of yellow and even different tones of purple. And then we have analogous yellows and greens and blues in that piece. Color is a wonderful way to create emphasis. If you have a certain area of your piece that you want to call attention to, you can give it visual interest through color. And it can actually create a focal point for your piece, and the observer will see this first, or you can create a painting that leads you back to that. So a strong emphasis that color can provide is one reason that some artists consider color to be one of the most powerful visual elements in their toolbox. So as you can see here, we have this lovely landscape, very gestural and painterly, with that vibrant red tree. And notice how the artist has led us back with all of the lines here, moving us back to the focal point. I also would point out to you that their artist is using the rule of thirds, which is this is a third of the way into the canvas. Very often that makes a great compositional choice. If you have a focal point, you want to put it a third of the way up or a third of the way in, and you'll get a really lovely composition. Then there's color and balance. It's very important to know that color has a certain power and weight, and that you have to make decisions carefully about how you're balancing your subject matter. So as you can see in the Miro, if you were to take your finger and cover over the red dot, it completely changes the composition. The whites and the white dot and the black marks, the triangle and that other squiggly mark on the left, carry a lot of weight. But all you need is one vibrant red dot on a field of no color, and you can see that it balances, and the composition suddenly settles into, it doesn't feel like it's tipped visually one way or the other. The T-Baud piece is a little more subtle, but he has carefully provided balance. And so he's got all these colorful billiard balls up here. And imagine if he had just left the bottom blue. It would feel very top-heavy. And so to anchor it and to balance the piece, he's placed the yellow that you see peeking out here in one of the billiard balls, and slightly in a few others, at the bottom. He also outlined this edge to bring your eye down. All of these are little tricks of the trade that hopefully you will begin to employ. Color uses. So there are three basic ways that color can be used in a painting and other works of art. There's local color, optical, and arbitrary. So local color is identifying a color or an object under ordinary daylight. It's color that we know. We know that bananas are yellow, that grass is green, and that some apples are red, cardboard boxes are brown, right? That's local color. Optical color is different. It's color that is the result of a property of a light. The color of an object changes at sunset, under moonlight, by candlelight. Even atmospheric effects can visually change the local color of objects. So their faces are very yellow from the candle that I believe is behind that woman's hand. That dress, that red dress, is probably even more vibrant red, but now it leans slightly orange because of the yellow that's in the optical effect of the light. And then there's arbitrary, and that's where colors are subjective. They're selected by the artist for design and aesthetic or emotional reasons. That's what the Fauvists were doing, right, when I showed you before. Emotional color. If you want to evoke a strong emotion from the emotional response from the viewer, color is a really effective way. So Leon Golub in the 1970s did a whole series of pieces about terrorism and really disturbing work, and noticed that he uses blood red for the background of that piece. And then, of course, we already talked about Pablo Picasso's use of color for emotional purposes. And so one of my favorite artists is Edward Hopper. And so if we were together in the classroom, and perhaps we will still be able to do this together, but I've made this video so that folks at home that are remote can have a really good experience with this presentation. So that's why I recorded it. But usually when we're together, I show this slide and I review, right? We have the idea of value, tints and shades, colors affect each other, color has intensity, there are color schemes, there's temperature, there's the use of balance, color as emphasis, the local, arbitrary, and optical color, and then emotional color. And so there's that quick snapshot, and then we click, and then we look and see what are we getting here? What is the artist employing in terms of color? So some of you probably are having some thoughts right now. Well, clearly we have optical color, right? Because there's a strong light source pouring in. What else do we see? I'm seeing complementary color scheme outside the window in the oranges of the building and the blue of the sky. I'm seeing broken color. If you look at her leg, her thigh, her whole leg has a creamy skin color, but he has broken the color by introducing some blue. And so it's a little more, it's less intense, although there's a very light value to her skin because of the light. The wall is very much a broken color. That's not a pure hue or a high intensity, even though it's really lit up. It's a broken blue. It's a greenish blue that has some orange introduced into it. Balance. So if you were to cover up the red building outside the window, it completely changes the balance and the weight of where things are. Her brightly lit up body with the pink dress is balanced, counterbalanced by that bright orange building. I also think it's very effective that he brought in that bright yellow line just outside the window. It looks like the brick of the outside, but it stabilizes this composition and also balances with the very light splash of light on the wall. All right, first thing that strikes me about this is there's a complementary color scheme. I'm seeing reds and greens. There are other colors as well. One could argue it's split complementary, but it's a little more subtle and nuanced. But first thing I noticed is that he was using reds and greens to make things pop. Broken color. There's also optical color happening here. There's a lot of contrast of value. There's balance that has been set up. Notice the yellow square up here on the right balances beautifully with her yellowy skin, although look, there's green introduced and reds and things into her skin tones. It's beautifully done. First thing that comes to mind here is optical color. Everything's lit up by this porch light. All of the everything in the painting is affected by that bright light. It's optical color that's presenting us with local color because it's such a white light. There's a sense of coolness, right? Color, temperature. It's nighttime. So Hopper has created a cool palette. I don't know if you can tell, but there's a lovely balance of these greens. We know that this building is likely white, but he's brought in a slight pinkness to it. There's a pink touch of pink in this white, which is a complement to the turquoisey blues that we're getting. There is a rule of thirds. He has put the subject matter, the focal point, a third of the way in from the side of the painting. Of course, high contrast. I love that this is all in silhouette. It's really dark and in silhouette. Look at this splash of light over here. Really nice. That's a balance element. Their hair is almost green, which is kind of cool. That's more of optical color, right, than local. And look at this little white curtain. Again, these little touches create balance. I love this painting. One of the main reasons I show this one is because of I want to point out to you as when you're painting and drawing with color that shadows are produced with blues and purples. That is the trick of the trade. If we were actually looking at this if this was a photograph, this would not be this blue. It would be a lower intensity color. It would have some blue qualities to it, but he's heightened that sense of a shadow. Look at the clever use of this light yellow square over here to balance with these curtains here. It's absolutely optical color. It's bright afternoon sun, but it looks like late afternoon. The sun is not high in the air. It's coming straight at these folks. But the main point is to show you how you create shadow by using blues and purples. Look at the balance technique of this little red triangle from that roof area and that chimney. That's brilliant use of color to create balance. And the background is really muted color. That's another trick of the trade in terms of landscapes. Things that go back in space become less intense in their vibrancy of color. They're more broken, they're more muted, and the things in the foreground are brighter. And he's really done a beautiful job in making these houses brighten up and stick out in the composition. Almost done. Here we have a night scene. This is the first thing that comes to mind if I had to pick a scheme is monochromatic. This is primarily a green composition. There are a little bits of yellow in it, but I look almost everywhere and I'm finding green. It could also be, one could argue it's an analogous color scheme in that it's yellows and greens, and so it's sort of a combination of the two. I could argue either way. Great use of balance, bright white little spot here with the sign here, the yellow of the windows in the background here. Really, we've got a splash of yellow here. He does a beautiful job of creating balance with his use of color. Notice the background are all very broken, low intensity, so that the star of the show is the lit up front of this house. Can't show Hopper and not talk about Nighthawks, an iconic work of art that I just love. We won't linger too long. I'm sure you've seen it many times. I'm seeing the strong use of red and green to create contrast, the sense of balance by adding this bright red splash of light on the red building, picked up and balanced by the bar. Rule of thirds, our focal point is a third of the way in. There's probably a lot of blue in this for the shadowing. There's definitely, notice the blue in there for that shadow. Broken colors muted in the background, vibrant colors for the subject matter. Really strong. That yellow door was a very, very specific choice. Look at that little splash of light yellow or light green there, balancing with some of these others. It's just beautifully done in terms of color. So there you have it. I thank you for your attention. I hope that gives you some background and information about how to go forward. And we will now move on to our first project in oil pastels.